anytime that I tell my mother, if I'm having a problem and I'm struggling, and she'll always go to wanting to fix it. She says, she says, sometimes I'll talk about relationship. I say, oh, relationship, it's hard. And she says, well, why don't you just do this? and and I'll say, Mom, I just want you to just be present with the fact that I'm feeling sad or disappointed, and really what I'm asking for from my mother is to just be with me. Just please, just be with my experience. You don't need to fix me. But she's also my mother, and she says, she says, I want you to be happy. And so she's trying to fix and trying to make better. So on this one wing, just being with, and much of what we are all practicing on this retreat, and where Angie is, very skillful instruction and guidance, is to build this muscle of being with. On the other wing, when it comes to trauma, what's especially important is that there's also times where we want to work with our experience. And what I mean by that is that we are purposefully engaging in a practice that is helping to shift or shape or change our experience. So, a couple of examples might be doing exercise, or doing a compassion practice, or writing a letter, talking to a friend. There's many things that we can do to purposefully try to shift our state. And as many of you might know or experience, having both of these wings is very useful. There'll be some times where simply say that I'm sad. I had a good friend lost their dog, who was very close to them, and a dog that I know. This was a couple months ago. So in that sadness, there was sometimes just being with the sadness and being with my friend. There was other times where I said, let's go for a walk, or let's go to the beach. And that was different from simply being with. I was helping them to work with their experience in a more proactive way. Now, the reason that I'm sharing this is that in meditation, and in meditation, I'd say culture or communities, being with is the most important thing. Of course, it's what we're working on, but sometimes it's the only wing of the bird. That the only instruction is to simply just keep being mindful of our pain, of our experience. And in those moments, we sometimes lose the other wing of working with. The main issue is that we need both. And if we go too far in either direction, we can run into trouble. That's really the essence of the work around trauma-sensitive mindfulness. If we're only being with, say, trauma, it might be useful, but at some point it might be overwhelming and too much. And we might need some different practices or interventions that are more working with our experience. However, if we were only working with our experience, we never really settle. Do you ever have the experience where it's like you're uncomfortable, maybe there's some pain, and you're trying to do everything to change it, and nothing's working? My good friend here in Indonesia, he fell this last week, and he really hurt his arm, his elbow. And the first night, he just was trying to get comfortable and find a place, and he was working with his arm. And at some point, he just said, I just need to be with the fact I'm in a lot of pain. And so he was eventually just needed to be with his experience. So we can't go too far in either direction. We need both. And that's what we're going to be doing today, is helping you both be with your experience and then also knowing when do you work with your experience and do something purposeful and different. The main question for many people is, how would I know? How would I know? It came up yesterday when I said, if you feel it's too much, if you feel you're overwhelmed, and I forget, I'm sorry, the person's name. They said, well, how would I know? Kelly, I'm not sure if it was you. How would I know that it's too much? Okay, sorry. When do I shift from being with to working with? It's a great question. In general, I encourage people to be with, especially if you're on retreat, be with your experience. But then there are moments when it is skillful and wise and compassionate to take a break or to do something different, where we work with our experience. So today, we're going to talk about this map. And it's subjective. It's not saying, if this always happens, you have to do this. But it's a very helpful map for all of you, I think, individually. And then you can decide if it's useful for you. Yeah, you can work with this in any way that you'd like. So I'm going to shift to slides, but Angie, I just want to see, is there anything that you want to add or share before we get into the slides here?
No, go ahead, please, David. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. Thanks, Angie. So we're going to talk today about the window of tolerance. Let me pull this up. Mhm. Oops. Here we go. Can you see my slides? Because yesterday, yeah, okay, good. Yesterday you saw my notes, but today you can see my slides. That's good. Okay. So the map. Um, the window of tolerance comes from the neuroscientist Dan Siegel. And Dan is some of you might know him, but he's an author, he's a parent, he's a great teacher. He's in the US and California. And about 20 years ago, he proposed this model called the window of tolerance. And it has been applied in many different systems. Dan studied complexity theory and systems theory. But here today, we're going to talk about how the window applies to the nervous system, working with our minds and bodies. The idea with the window of tolerance is that for all of us, there is a window where which we can most effectively tolerate our moment to moment experience. This is like a middle ground. And when we are in our window, we're most likely to feel connected to ourselves, to feel steady, regulated. We'll talk more about what that means. This is where our heart, it's like it's beating, but it's not racing. We might feel energized, but we don't feel anxious. Yeah, this is this middle ground where we can be most effective in our lives. So that's the idea with a window, kind of like a sweet spot. Now, on either side of this window, and this will relate to trauma, we'll talk about this, are two different zones. And these zones have different terms. The first zone is something known as hyperarousal. Now, this is where we have too much energy in our minds and bodies. Hyper, meaning there's a lot of, And arousal is meaning physiological arousal. That's not, what that means is literally the energy that we have in a moment. So, some examples, I'll be giving you a long list here. Some examples of hyperarousal is when we feel very anxious, or we feel like hypervigilant, like we're on edge. Maybe we have a, you know how sometimes there's a loud noise and we get really scared, like a exaggerated startle response. Our heart is beating very quickly, pupils dilated. This is what hyperarousal is. Now, on the other end, we have something known as hypoarousal, meaning that there is little or no energy in the nervous system. Um, this is where we experience feeling foggy, numb, dissociated. Um, there's an absence of sensation. We might feel kind of checked out. So, that is the idea here with the window of tolerance, this middle zone, hyperarousal, and then hypoarousal. The reason this is important for us here is that trauma will tend to push us outside of our window of tolerance. When we experience trauma, both in the moment and then in the future, if we're experiencing post traumatic stress, we will be experiencing hyper or hypoarousal. So, for example, we talked yesterday about fight, flight, and freeze. Yeah. So, fight, flight is when we're in hyperarousal. This is sympathetic arousal, where we suddenly have lots of energy. Hypoarousal is when we're more in freeze. So, we're feeling more numb, more dissociated. So this model basically is telling us that, when we might be in our window, but then when we experience painful things, we are pushed out of our window of tolerance into these different zones. One of the ways that this is talked about is dysregulated arousal. So you can see this here. Here's someone who in their window, but then maybe they had a memory or they had a painful experience, and then that actually pushed them into hyperarousal. Now, what this chart shows here is that our arousal, it's changing all the time. And what we're going to be doing today are practices designed to support your window of tolerance. Yeah. But let's take a moment here with a practice, just very briefly, just as a way to kind of highlight the fact that our window, it's changing all the time. I invite you to notice, where are you in your window right now? And you could do that by turning your attention maybe internal, or looking at this visual here. But just see for a moment if you could notice, where are you? Where would you place yourself on this chart? Are you more in the middle? Are you more towards the red, the hyper arousal, or towards the blue? And nothing to change here about that, just seeing if you can notice where you are. If you can't, that's fine. This might be a new practice. See if you can also notice what told you or what's telling you that that's where you are in your window. For some of us, it might be sensations. For others, it might be the quality of thoughts. But also just noticing, what is the information that you have? Okay, and then you can let that go. And one more question for like reflection for all of you is, what are the circumstances and situations in your life right now that will tend to push you out of your window of tolerance? Are there common stressors that you are facing that will tend to land you kind of in red or the blue? We all have different stressors, and just noting that for yourself. Yeah, we can work with that later in this session. So I just want to come back to yesterday just to emphasize this. Yesterday we talked about post-traumatic stress, and one of the areas of symptoms is this idea of, it's called arousal and reactive symptoms. And that's another way of saying dysregulated arousal. So this is a very common symptom of traumatic stress. We talked about it yesterday, I think, with the soda bottle and the accelerator and the brake of the nervous system. This is where we are experiencing either a lot of energy or not much energy at all. So I'm going to pause here in a moment for just any questions and comments before we move to practice. But I just want you to know that there are many different signs of dysregulated arousal that you can become aware of and trained in. Now, many people in the audience there in the ballroom, you will probably not be able to see this. So I'm sorry, I apologize. I know the writing is very small. But Angie, she's going to be, Angie, can you provide, I sent you the slides. So you will be, I think you'll be receiving this at some point. But this, I just wanted you to know, this is a list of different signs and symptoms. I will say a couple here of hyper and hypoarousal. So let me say, if you can't see it, I'll say a few. So, for example, when we're in hyperarousal, there's agitation. We have hyperactivity, tingling, twitching, our breath. We have hyperventilation or increased heart rate. So that is some of the different parts of this list. And then I'll just show you here. And Angie, I see you're doing something. And then this is for hypoarousal. Here's another list. I would not worry right now about this list. I just wanted you to know you will have this list after the retreat if you'd like to go deeper, because there's many things we can learn. But the main thing I want you to be aware of right now is that it's too much energy or too little energy. Angie, anything you need here before we
Yesterday, the slides you sent, I've already forwarded to them, so they will get this set as
good.
well as soon as you send it to me later tonight. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Angie. I appreciate it. So those are some of the different signs. And in a moment, we're going to then, for the rest of this session, we're going to work with practices that are designed to support your window of tolerance. That's really what we're going to be doing today. And before, there's one thing I want to say, and then I'll open it up for comments and questions. The goal of mindfulness practice is not always just to be in the window of tolerance. Sometimes people, I think we can have the idea, I know I had this, when I first learned meditation, where I thought, the goal is to be calm, or the goal is to always be balanced. And what I quickly learned is that I often don't have a lot of control over my mind. You might have noticed these thoughts, they come, they go, our emotions, they come, they go. But we can learn to be present with these experiences. The goal is not just to always be in this window where we feel supported, connected to ourselves. There will be times where we are in hyper or hypoarousal in our lives, in our practice, and that's fine. It's actually very smart. Coming back to this, it's saying, yes, this is a very smart strategy. However, in meditation, if we are only in dysregulated arousal for many, many hours or days at a time, that can be unhelpful, especially with trauma. And so, part of the goal of trauma sensitive mindfulness is that you all have tools to help you come back into your window when that would be supportive. We want to know that we can work with our experience and not only just be with it. So that's what we'll be doing for the rest of this session today, is talking about the tools that you can use to help you to regulate, to come back into your window of tolerance.